In an opening segment which gave me flashbacks of the emotional punch we opened with in Pixar's Up, we're introduced to the early life of Kaylee Fleming as Bee, a young girl whose mother lost the battle with cancer years earlier, and now her father is booked in to have heart surgery. When the now 12-year-old Bee finds her mother's old camcorder, she also starts seeing a curious creature, which turns out to be an imaginary creature named Blossom, who has been forgotten by her kid, and now works with the somewhat grumpy Cal, played by Ryan Reynolds, in trying to find new homes for old imaginary friends. Bee begins trying to help and finds herself drawn into a magical world of creatures, memories, and heartfelt emotions, all the while trying to reconcile her own emotions over her father's upcoming surgery. Less magical whimsy and more emotional impact, the core focus in this film is the real world aspect of Bee and her father, and her grandmother, played wonderfully by Fiona Shaw. That's the actual story here. And whilst there are plenty of wonderfully imaginative moments with the ifs, especially a transformation of the retirement home for them that occurs in the midpoint of the film, it never really feels that the larger idea of them is explored in any great detail until the very closing act, when they're used to open up wounds of emotion. The voice cast of the myriad of ifs that we see is stacked with names, some only offering a single line, but aside from a brief tour of the retirement home, we primarily stick with only two ifs throughout. The overall story is one that serves to remind us that sometimes we all need to turn to the comfort of our own childhood memories to aid us through times of stress and worry. And the importance of Reynolds' character in the story is entirely signposted right from our very first encounter with him. However, the film doesn't quite feel like it taps into its ambitious ideas, and does feel a little patchy at times, especially when we're being granted the tour of the world of ifs, which just seems a little too forced overall. But what it did do is it hit me right in the emotional core. There were three moments in particular in the film that had me with tears streaming down my face. And by the end of the film, I felt a warm glow inside, as though my own imaginary friend from my childhood had finally returned to offer me comfort. Warm, enjoyable, visibly beautiful, albeit a bit messy. If feels like a throwback to the childlike family adventures of yesteryear, even if it doesn't entirely work. Rennie Harlin's reboot of The Strangers is apparently set within the worlds of the first two films, but is planned over three chapters to be its own story, with each chapter going in different directions tonally, but each being directly connected by its own set of characters. As a fan of the original film, which tapped into my idea of what makes a good horror, with a slow building tension in a very believable manner, I was hoping for a return to more of that kind of film, and it's safe to say that I walked away from this one quite pleased with the results. Maya and her boyfriend Ryan, played by Madeline Petch and Froy Gutierrez, are on a road trip celebrating their 5-year anniversary when they break down in a small town called Venus. Whilst waiting for their car to be repaired, they book into an Airbnb lodge in a remote part of the surrounding woodlands, but are interrupted when a strange girl comes knocking on the door asking whether Tamara is home. Ryan has to head back into town to retrieve his inhaler that he left in the car, which leaves Maya alone in the house, and she soon begins to suspect that someone's in the house with her, with events soon building in very familiar ways to what we've seen previously. There's a wonderful slow build to this, with the initial encounters with the townsfolk of Venus leading to an unnerving tension in every interaction. This is a town who don't appear to be altogether friendly to strangers in their midst. And then there's the isolated locale of the house, creating a cut-off claustrophobic nature to the latter two acts. Harlin's direction plays with shadows and light, as well as a lot of classic use of double-take moments as the masked figures who are stalking Maya and Ryan move around the house or the environment around it, just out of sight of the pair. No cliche or trope of the horror genre is left untouched, but Harlin utilizes them well, with skillful camera shots and very good pacing choices, so it never actually feels overly tropish. Light on bloodshed and all about atmosphere, Harlin breathes some new life into the genre while sticking firmly to formula. with an approach that feels old school in nature and keeps you unnerved throughout. A closing moment in the film hints at what to expect from Chapter 2 and left me wanting to see where this story goes to next. There's nothing original, and anyone familiar with the original film will find no real surprises, but it's skillfully made and packed with atmosphere and is a welcome new take on an old idea.